Welcome to this tutorial. This is for the complete beginner to music production in the box, so to speak, or using a DAW, specifically Studio One. And what I'd like to do here is to create kind of the tutorial that I wish I would have seen when I first got into music production using the PC and DAWs. There's a lot of information, a ton of information online nowadays in videos, but a lot of it is spread out and there's pieces and parts everywhere. So I wanted to kind of make an introductory video for creating your first basic track, kind of a skeleton track, and getting your idea out and building from the bottom up. We're not going to go into details on extensive mixing and things like that, but just getting your ideas out and fleshing them out a little bit to begin your song creation process. And we'll begin on the start page here, and just know that we're not going to cover setting up your audio device, your MIDI controller, because I do have tutorials on that. This here is where you can access your audio device. I am using the built-in audio because I need to do that to capture the audio for these tutorials. But you can access that here. You can click once and then you're going to open up the options menu in your audio setup. Then you can click here and choose your audio device. Again, look out for a link here where you can see more detailed information on how to set up your audio device. I'll go ahead and cancel out. And then also for any external MIDI controller, you can always control comma, open up that options panel, and then external devices, and then click on the add to set up your device there. Again, there will be a link here if you'd like to learn more about how to do that. Now I'll cancel out of there. Now when we're creating our songs, there is going to be certain metadata included within that file. Say if we render down a WAV file, your artist name, so you can double click and put a name in there for your artist. You can put a genre, a website. You can even click here and add a thumbnail image here that will be included and show up in the media player for your track. And let's just go ahead to create a new song. Click there. And we have this dialog that opens up. We have styles or templates that you can use. I always start with an empty song because I like to have kind of a blank slate or an empty canvas to build on. I never want to be conditioned to kind of go a certain way, but that's just me. You can choose from any of these to begin. You also have something for setting up interfaces and any other user presets that you may want to, or that you can save and access here. I'll come back to that styles. Here we have our song title. By default, it is going to have your artist name that you put in that screen we were just looking at, and the current date. Now, this is also important here. This is the location where all of your songs are going to be saved by default. Whenever you create a song, it's going to put that file in this folder. We can, of course, change that to be whatever we'd like by clicking on the ellipsis there and then choosing a different location. But really quickly, I'm going to control comma, come to our locations, because I think this is important. File management, if you're just getting started, you can end up with a hot mess. Your files, you don't know where they are and all of that. So I just want to take a second here. So on locations in options, user data, whatever you put in here, we can click that ellipsis and set up a location, and that will be your default location for every song that you create is going to go to that folder. So if you're wondering where they're going, this is where they're going. I'm going to cancel out, come back to create a new song. And I'm just going to go ahead and leave the default naming there. And I am going to change this to my desktop though. I'll select desktop there, select that folder. We next have sample rate, and I'm just going to leave that at 44.1. I usually use 44.1 or 48 kilohertz to record. Resolution, we'll keep that the same. Everything else is pretty much good to go. Take note of the stretch audio files to song tempo. For this example, I am going to leave that checked. Normally I don't, but we're going to take a look at loops briefly in this tutorial. So I am going to leave that selected, and it'll make sense in a moment. Now that we've got all that out of the way, we'll click OK, and we are taken to the song page. Now this is where we're going to be able to get all of our ideas out. We can choose our different instruments, whether we're doing drums or piano, a synth, a bass, whether we're recording vocals. Then we have this area here, the arranged view, for where we're going to see all of that information show up and be recorded, and we can arrange it there. We can access our instruments and effects and loops, everything in from the browser here. And then we have a track column over here, which will make more sense in just a moment. Now, when I'm working on a track, I tend to start with drums, but you can start with a piano or a synth and begin with a melody or chord progression. There is no wrong way to begin your song. It's whatever, inspires you, and it's going to get your ideas out the best. But we're going to start with the drums here first. And for drums, there are several options for laying those down. My preferred method, and the method that I recommend, is to record them live with a MIDI controller, and I like to use the drum pads on my controller to at least get the bass drum and snare down, and the hats. Then I'll go in and manually add some tweaks or some ghost notes, some rolls, and all of those things. So I use kind of a combination of live recording. I want to get that feeling and that expression out by using my controller, and then I'll go in and manually make some adjustments. And I typically don't quantize because I want to keep some small imperfections in there. I don't want everything to sound like a metronome, but that's your call. If you want to quantize when you're recording your drums, there's actually this IQ here. If you activate this, then it's going to quantize as you record. And I actually may use this for this tutorial because I'm using the built-in audio and I do have latency. So in order to kind of mitigate any playback recording timing issues, I may use the input quantize for this video. So now you can always just manually program the drums. That's the other way, just from the bottom up, your drums, your bass drum, your hat, your snare, and just create everything in a MIDI event or a MIDI part, and we'll take a look at that. And the other method is to use loops. Now, I have mixed feelings about loops, and I've been against them in the past, but nowadays when we're creating everything from scratch ourselves, we can't expect to be masters of everything. We can't be a master piano player, master drummer, mixing engineer, and you have to wear a lot of hats. So if you're a vocalist and say you play the guitar or piano, but you suck at programming drums or playing them on your controller, in this instance, I think it's totally fine to use. There's lots of quality drum loops out there, and this can help you put together a quality recording and product, or I don't want to call a song a product, but I'm just trying to say that they can be useful, and I think that it's fine to use loops, when we're using them in that sort of situation. And so we'll start with the loops and take a look at that method first, and we won't spend too much time there, but I at least want to show you how to access them and briefly how they function. And this is why we set that stretch audio files to song tempo setting in the song start page or the song creation page. We check that box because when we're working with the loops, they will adjust according to our tempo here. And we can access that time stretch setting by clicking on the sample rate down below. Then you can see stretch audio files to song tempo is checked there. So just know that you can access that anytime by clicking on the sample rate. And I'll go ahead and cancel out. Now, our loops tab is here. We can also press F8 on our QWERTY keyboard to access the loops in that way. And so we have some sorting options up at the top where we can choose style different selections here on how to filter the results. And how many loops you have is going to vary depending on which version you're using or if you've bought any additional packs to add on. But making use of these filters up above can help you navigate this a bit easier. So right now we've got style selected, so this is going to be our top level of how these are going to be sorted. If I were to change this to instrument, then you can see that this then changes to show organ, pads, piano, strings, and so on. So they're sorted by that way. And then when we expand out, say the atmosphere, we have style. Now you can see we've got the style. So then the character is going to be our next loop, our next tier down. So that's how these work. I'm just going to come back up, and then I want to change this back to style. And we're not going to create a masterpiece in this video. We're just going to understand, how to go about this process. And I'm going to create I have no idea what sort of song we're going to do. It's going to be a blend of several different styles probably. But I'm going to come to the pop folder, and we're talking about drums, so I'll select the drums. And we want a loop here. And when we select a loop, we're shown some information down here in the information pane. And we can see the sample rate, the bit depth of the file, the BPM, how long it is, and what type of file it is. This is an audio loop. We can even play back. And this is going to play back at its original BPM, which is 85. If we click this icon there, then it's going to play back at our song tempo, which is 120. So we can hear that that's sped up. And we have this button here that we can click to make it loop and continually play back. And then we have volume control here. So I'm actually just going to go ahead and take this first one, and we would simply drag that in to our arrange view. And I'm going to F5 to close out that browser, and we can see that this is lined up just fine. Let me go ahead and play this back real quick. Okay, and I'm going to press C to turn that click track off for the time being. Now, and I'm going to change this tempo to 95, press enter, and we can see our range view has changed up a bit, but our MIDI loop, or our audio loop, still remains in alignment with our bars because we have that stretch audio files to song tempo set. So I'm going to keep talking about that because that's important if you're going to work with a loop. And if I F4 and open up the inspector while this track is selected, we can see that when we check that box, the tempo is going to be set to time stretch. And that's really what that does. If we had don't follow or follow, then when we make tempo changes, our MIDI or our audio loop is not going to sync up like it just did. And also something else to keep in mind here is the time stretch mode, which is set to drums right now. That works for what we're doing. We're working with a drum track. But if you're working with different audio loops that aren't drums, you may want to experiment here and see if one of these is going to work better. So sound may be for like polyphonic audio loops that have a lot more frequencies going on than, say, a drum loop. Now, solo would be for something like a vocal solo or a trumpet solo, anything that's going to be like a melody. But we'll leave that on drums because that's what we're working with. And I'll F4 and close out that inspector. So now we've got a 4-bar drum loop, and we're going to use this for the foundation of our song. I'm going to hold down Alt and click in the timeline there to set our right locator. I'm going to hold down Control and click at the beginning of our loop to set our left locator. Now we can press the / on our computer keyboard to activate that loop. We can see that that bar has turned blue, and now when we play back, this is going to loop back continuously. And we can hear that that's slowed down to our 95 BPM. You'll want to be careful with how much you adjust the BPM with these loops, because at a certain point it's not going to sound good anymore. Now, if we just kept this one loop in throughout our entire song, that's going to be very repetitive and incredibly boring. So a lot of these loops, if I F8 and come back to the loops tab, a lot of these will come with variations. So if I select this next one, we can hear that we have some hats in there that are introduced. If I click this third one, we have some sort of ending there. So just know that you'll want to pay attention to whether there are kind of these switching up. I don't know what the technical term is because I'm not a drummer, but these fills and other things to help add variation within your song, and then you can drag those in and place them where you'd like. Now I'll F5 and close out that. And also when you're building out your song, we can, while this loop is selected, we can just press D to add another one. I'm going to press W to zoom out a bit. So by pressing D while this is highlighted, then we can add more of this loop to our track. I'm pressing delete to get that out of there. And actually, I will hold Alt and click at the beginning of bar 10 to extend our loop out. And let's say we want to add a piano part to this. I'll F6 to access the Instruments tab, and then let's expand out our Presonus folder here. And since we're talking about Studio One, I'm going to use the devices that come with Studio One specifically. And we'll come to the presence here, expand that out, come to the bottom. We've got a Studio Grand there. If I expand that out, we have several different options. And I'll choose the Studio Grand and just drag that in below our drum loop. And at this point, we've got our piano ready. So I'm going to go ahead and close this out for the moment, and I'm going to press the decimals on the numeric keypad to come back to the beginning of our song. Our track is armed for recording and monitoring, so I will I'm just going to play some random chords here, and I'm going to hit the asterisk on the numeric keypad to begin recording. I'm going to press C to turn the click track on. And I'm actually not happy with that, so I'm going to take the record off for a second by hitting the asterisk and then delete that out. Delete this other part out here. Come back to the beginning of our track. Okay, so we've got a basic little random chord progression here, and we can, extend our drum track out, as I just showed, with by pressing D. We can add those fills in, and then we can come in and add melody parts and just keep playing. If you're a piano player, then you already know what to do here. You can just play what you want to get out and record it on your track. If you wanted to keep building out this basic track that we've got going on, then you can come up to the presence here again, or any other instrument. Say if we wanted a bass, then we could bring in a bass. Okay, so I've got some wrong notes in there, but you get the idea how you can keep building this up, and you don't have to limit yourself to these specific bars. You know, if you wanted to go ahead and build out your drum track and then play a complete passage, you know, if you're a better player than I am, you could of course do that, and you don't have to restrict yourself to this area of looping. But this is just to give you a basic idea of how you can go about building this out. We can add even more percussive elements. We can add more instruments. If you'd like to record vocals, then how we can go about doing that is by pressing T on our QWERTY keyboard. And in this way, we have the add tracks dialog, and then we can choose the type of track. And we'd want an audio track for recording a live instrument or a vocal. And you can choose your count here. We'll just leave that at 1. And let's just call this vocal. And let's see, we want mono if we're going to be recording a vocal. And we'll choose OK. And now we have an audio track set up, and we can arm that for recording. And then let me take that monitoring off. But if I hit the asterisk here, then we can see that I'm now recording my vocal back there. And I'm just going to go ahead and delete that out. But you can see how we can quickly get our ideas out and kind of develop this skeleton track that we can then further build out. Okay, so now let's take a look at, I'm going to press Shift and T to delete that audio track out. And let's take a look at recording our drums live now. And I'm going to just open up this presence. We can click on the top there and choose to remove that out. I'm going to actually remove the other one out because we're just going to start completely from scratch. I'll Shift T to remove that and this, as well as our loop. And I'm going to, let's see, I'm going to hold down Alt and click at the beginning of bar 6 to set up a 4-bar loop here. I usually will do a 2 or 4 bar, usually 4-bar loop when I'm recording live drums. And then again, since we're talking about Studio One specifically, I'm going to bring in an impact to keep in line with using the built-in devices here. And we can just, from the browser, drag that into our arrange view, and that's going to load up. And before we get into recording this live, I want to talk about something that, you know, can drive you crazy if you're new to working with impact and you're going to be using your MIDI controller to do it live. Now, the default mapping for these pads, you can see the B1, C2, C#2, and so on. These align with the keys and drum pads if you have those on your MIDI controller. Now, by default, when you load this, it's going to start on B0. And this, you know, for an OCD person like myself, this drove me crazy. And I've set it up, my own default, that matches with my drum controller and my pads, because I prefer to use my pads to record my drums versus the keys. And also know that if you were to load in a kit, a lot of these kits are going to have different mappings, all completely different. But if you start with a default, then it's going to be on B0 and move up chromatically. And then when you change to a new kit, it's going to keep that mapping, starting on B0 and going up. Now, I want to start on C1 though. So just know that you can set this up having this first pad selected, and it doesn't have to be C1, just whatever works best for you. Click in this first box here, and then press the first pad on your MIDI controller. Click on the second box, and then now click out of there, and now we have this first pad is set to C1, and these are both being triggered at the same time because this one also has C1. But of course we could select that and then come in, choose our next pad, and then continue up to set these up as we would like. Then up at the very top here we have store preset. We can click that and then come in and name this whatever we'd like and put in a description to help us remember what it is or what have you. I'll go ahead and cancel out, but I've already done this, and so we can come to our presets menu at the top there, and then we see my default. If I choose that, then we'll see that we start on C1 and move up chromatically. And then from this point on, whenever I choose a kit, it's going to default to that saved settings that I have that match up for my MIDI controller. So now I can just go straight through my pads. And I have to change my pad map here. And just, you know, I can play these as I want them and as works best for my MIDI controller. The most important thing to keep in mind is that you want to be sure that you choose your default first and then start going through the kits if you're going to use the kits. So then that way it kind of tells Impact, hey, I want to use these mappings for each kit that I'm going to be working with. And also, typically when I am recording my drums, I will reset this. I'll just have my default mappings and I won't load a kit in. I'll load each individual pad and make those decisions with each new song. And we could do that just by highlighting a pad and then coming to the plus button here. And then we have a dialog where we can navigate to our drum sounds and then select files in that way. We could also press F9 and this will take our browser to our file directory on our PC, and then we can navigate to where we have our sounds and we can just click, hold, and drag those onto the pads. And then we can use previous and next to cycle between different sounds within whichever folder that we've added to move up and down between these without having to drag every time. But for simplicity's sake, I'm just going to go ahead and use this preset that's available, and if you're just getting started, you may be working with the presets anyway, so we'll just keep it simple. So I just want to hear what kind of sounds we've got here. I'm actually going to transpose this down a bit. And you can see how to do that by coming up top here. Then we also have a tune. I'm going to drop this one down a bit also. And so now I'm going to use my MIDI controller. Okay, now I'm going to go ahead and close out the Impact. I'm going to press F5 to close out the browser. We've got our loop set up. It is active because the bar is blue there. I'm going to press the decimal symbol on my numeric keypad to come back to the beginning of our song. And let's see, I'm going to F3 to open up the mix console. And I'm going to click this button here to raise the click track level up just a little bit. Just a touch there. Hopefully that's not too much. And the click track is active. I'm going to go ahead and press record. And let me raise the tempo up a little bit here. I'm going to put that at 120. Press E to zoom in a little bit. And I'm not happy with that, so I'm going to deactivate the recording, delete that out, delete this out. Remember, I am using built-in audio and I've got some latency issues here. And I'm going to go ahead and deactivate recording and delete that out again. And I'm going to go ahead and use the input quantize. And I will set this to eighth notes, and hopefully this will correct my latency issues. Activate recording. Add another snare. First I need to, okay, so we've got a basic little beat there that we've done live, and we can actually double click on this MIDI part to open up the editor, and then we can look at the individual MIDI notes and make any adjustments here. I think everything's pretty much spot on since we activated the input quantized, so no need to make any adjustments. Again, I usually don't use quantization when I'm doing my drum tracks because I like to have a bit more of a human feel. We do have a humanized option in the actions area here, but of course we need to select the notes first, but we're not going to worry about that right now because this sounds just fine for our basic tutorial here. Now, since we're working with Impact, which is a drum sampler, when we open up the editor, it's taken into a drum edit mode, and we can see here, I'll hold down Control and use my mouse wheel to zoom in a bit. We can see that the names of our pads are showing up here to the left, so we can see exactly what's going on, and we can even audition the sounds from here. So as I talked about, the other way is to manually program this in, even from the ground up, the bass, the snare. Then you can use this to see exactly what it is that you're doing and audition your sounds. Now let's hear what the hats sound like. I don't think I really care too much for these with with these, but we'll work with them. So I'm just gonna actually press W to zoom out a bit. I'm gonna double click and hold on the second click and drag this all the way out, and then we will, our quantize is at eighth notes. I'm going to right click on that one long MIDI note and then choose to split that at grid, and what that's going to do is split at whatever our quantized value is at, so we have these eighth notes. I think this is going to sound obnoxious, but we'll hear. We'll just go ahead and work with it. So I'm going to delete out some of these and then double click and hold and drag that out. And then I'm going to change this quantized value to 30 seconds and then split this at grid. I'm going to Control Z to undo that. Change that to 16th notes. Okay, we're not working on a masterpiece, remember. I'll F2 and close that out. F6, I don't want F6 actually. I want to come back to our impact and let's see if we can't. That hat's gonna drive me crazy. Okay, that's a little bit better. Okay, so now say we want to add a bass to this. I'll F6, open up our instruments, and let's bring in a MIDI. I'll drag that over to the arrange view, and we want a bass, so we'll come to the bass. I'm actually just gonna roll with this, guys. Let's see. I'm gonna F5 and close out that browser. And so we've got our track for the Mai Tai highlighted. We've got audio. I'm gonna hit record. I'm gonna undo that real quick. For some reason that's cut off. Now our note is starting a little bit before that MIDI part, so I'm just expanding out the event so I can access that note and pull it in. And now I'll go ahead and pull that back. I forgot I had the input quantize on. I definitely don't want that on my bass, but we'll leave it. So I'll F2, close out the editor. Let me open up this Mai Tai again. I'm gonna take this filter cutoff a bit up. So we could actually put an envelope on this filter or automate it or do all sorts of things, but I'm just gonna raise it up a little bit. I'm gonna F6, come back to our instruments. We'll do another Mai Tai. Let's find we'll bring in a bell. Let's try this one out. Uh-oh, my computer's having problems with this one. Okay, I'm gonna take this quality down to 80s because my computer's choking. I'm gonna take the filter up a little bit, the cutoff, close that out, activate recording. I'm gonna Control A, select all of those, and I'm gonna choose 8th. And press Q. I'm gonna bring in one more. that cut off a bit up. Okay, so this is incredibly boring, but you get the idea of how we're creating this from scratch and, you know, building this up. Then, of course, as we saw with the loop, we can select our drum, our impact track here, and just press D on our QWERTY keyboard. I'm going to press W to zoom out a bit. And then we can just press D again and build this out. And then what we can do is come in and we can even do dropouts here and just kind of, well, actually, I want to be sure that we've got the right arrows there. I'm going to E to zoom in a bit. And pull this in for like a dropout in our drums. And we could also come to our bass and then press D to duplicate that out. That first bell that we brought in, and we can even pull this other one to here because we may not want to have both of those at the same time, just to add a bit of variation. You know, there's no way to go wrong with this. Just experiment to the sound that you want to create and what sounds good to you. And then you can see that you can just continue to develop this out, keep adding more elements. You don't have to have 50 tracks for a song. Sometimes less is more. A lot of my tracks will only have 7, 8, 9 instrument tracks. And then I'll, you know, do vocals over that. And the vocals, there may be several for harmonies, one for the main vox, one for backup, and so on. But this video is already getting long, so I'm not going to go into fully developing this track out into a complete song because we'd be here forever. But I think you can get the idea of where we're going with this. Now, we talked about manually programming, so we're briefly going to just take a look at that. And actually what I'm going to do is delete this part out. I'm going to hold Alt and set the right locator there, hold down Control and set the left locator there. So now we've got our bass and our two bells there, but our drum track is gone. And actually, just to make this clear, I'm going to select those and delete them out. Now, if we're going to create our drum track manually, first we need to create a MIDI part. So I'm going to double click, and then we have that MIDI part that's added in. It's taking up all of those bars because our loop is active, so it's filling that in. And now at this point, I'm actually going to Shift and E to expand out vertically. And we can access this MIDI part by double clicking. We're taken to the editor. And I'm just going to use my mouse wheel to scroll down to our sounds. Again, these match up to the pads on our impact. So bass drum 1, we can see bass drum is 1 is there. Now, this is not how I typically go about doing my drums, so this may be a little bit rough, but we will go ahead and give it a shot. So I'm gonna go ahead and play back. You can see our song position cursor is here, so we're not to our MIDI part just yet. And I'm gonna press W to zoom out a bit. I didn't even get that on the bass drum. Okay, I just want to quickly say, if you're, say, someone who's used to working in FL Studio, this, what we're seeing here is based on our quantized value, which is eighth notes. So this is what our grid is set up as. If you're used to working in, say, a 16-step sequencer, we can change this to 16th notes, and then now we have a 16th note grid that we're working with here. Now we're working with several bars here at a time, but if I were to press E to zoom in here, then you can see here, this is bar 12, the beginning, and this is the beginning of bar 13. So one bar here, we now have 16 steps. And so this is basically how that works within Studio One and a lot of other DAWs that use this sort of grid layout. But we'll go ahead and continue on. Also, if you notice this jumping around, that can drive you crazy if you don't know what it is. Basically, press F on your QWERTY keyboard is going to turn that. It's called follow. It's going to follow the song position cursor wherever it's going and push this around. So if you don't want that to happen, just press F on your QWERTY keyboard. If you notice this here, that represents the follow. So if I press F, that turns off. Of course, we can also click there to activate and deactivate that as well. Now, if we have this whole loop zoomed in, then it's not going to jump around like that. But if you wanted to zoom in and get close on some edits without having it jump around, so I'll press F, and now you see it's not going to change when that song position cursor leaves the screen. Okay, so you can see what's going on here. Again, this isn't the method that I normally use, and actually this is starting to drive me crazy because I don't like these hats, and you know, this is just kind of a junky beat at this moment, but you get the idea of how you can come in and make these add these MIDI notes and then build out your drum track in this way as well as the third method. And of course, if you were to play live and you wanted to add some variations, then you can come in and use this method as well. And I think the last thing we'll cover, I'll F2 and close that out, is just know that in the mix console we can access the level controls or the faders for all of these different instruments there if we press F3. So we can see we have our impact and our different MIDIs are here. And if you notice, there's actually multiple channels there for the impact. So we could, we can click this icon on any of the impact channels to open up the MIDI. At the very top here, we have these check marks for stereo 1 through 5, and that's why we have those channels in the mix console, because they've been activated. We can come along and activate all these other ones, make each of them active, and then for each pad we can send that out on a separate channel within the mix console. So you can see that we have that set to stereo 4 and it's coming out on stereo 4. So if you wanted to add individual effects to your sounds or mix them in that sort of way, have say 8 outs for your impact and then set up a bus. So we could, with this first channel selected, I'll hold down shift and select through to stereo 5, right click on that and then add bus for selected channel. We now have bus 1. We could name that drums and add a compressor for all of those tracks. And we can actually name these whatever we'd like down at the bottom, so to help us remember what they are in the mixer. So if we had hats here, we could just double click and name that hats. We can actually change our track colors by clicking there, and that's going to tie in with our mix console as well. If I F3 and close out the mix console and then double click on this MIDI part, and if you are someone who prefers to use the piano roll, just know that that is available. This is for accessing the drum editor, which is what it will open up into by default when we double click on a MIDI part for impact. But we can also click on this icon there, and then this gives us the piano roll. I'll F2 to close off that editor, and the last thing we'll take a look at is, well, what if you wanted to add an effect to one of your tracks? This is a pretty straightforward and simple thing to do. So if I'm going to press C to turn off that click track, and I'm going to press F7, and this opens up our effects tab within the browser here, Presonus. We can just click to expand that out, and we have access to all these different effects. So if we wanted, say, a reverb, we could come down to the room reverb here, and it seems like there may be a touch of reverb on this already, but we could come to the, I'm just going to choose something really dramatic here, Cathedral, drag that onto the track, and now we have we wanted to put compression on our impact. I wouldn't recommend doing it this way, but you get the idea of what's going on here. Okay, now we're going to wrap up here, and this is an incredibly boring loop of, beginning of a track, but just know that this is how you can do that. And again, while this is selected, I can press D, bring that out, double click on this, come in and make some variations manually. We could also set up our loop here and come in into record mode and just add in variations live, add in additional percussive elements live, and do it that way. What else? I'll F2 and close out that editor. And again, we could select our bass, press D, and add that out. We can double click on that to come in and even manually make some adjustments there. and or play it live, which is what I recommend, or just set up a longer loop and just play a longer passage. You know, it doesn't have to be a 4 or 6 or 8 bar loop that you record at once. You can record as long as you'd like. A lot of that just has to do with your skill level and how well you're able to play these instruments. And so with that, I'm going to go ahead and wrap up here. I hope that you've gained some useful tips and information from this video, and I will see you in the next tutorial. Take care.